Hello and welcome to my booktube channel, Jack and the Book Stack, where I talk about a wide variety of book genres and the bookish lifestyle. Today I have my March reading wrap-up for you, where I rank all the books that I read in the past month from my least favorite to my most favorite. So you're going to see a ranking of how much I enjoyed all of them. I categorize them in generally 3 ways: books that I disliked, liked, and loved, and I have chapters down below that you can skip around if you so choose. And for videos where I have dedicated reading vlogs, I will leave the links down below for you. In March, I predominantly read fantasy books, which I am not all that surprised about based on the reading vlogs that I had planned for this month. Also, since we're finished with the first quarter of 2024, I'm taking a look at all the genres that I have read throughout the year to see how balanced I am. So again, not surprised that fantasy is the leading genre for me, but I am very, very pleased with general fiction, how that is just behind fantasy, since that is a category I wanted to focus on this year. In March, I have a new category for books that I read, and hopefully we won't see this category for the rest of the year. That's because there were some books that I hated this month, so it doesn't fit into the other categories. And I couldn't wait for this wrap-up to unhaul the books. I took them to my local used bookstore and I went to sell them. So let's cut to Jack from the past to tell you about those books. I absolutely could not wait for the end of March to get these 2 books out of my house. And normally I don't have a category for books I hate because I don't normally say I hate books. But if you saw my video where I read these, you understand why. So before I go and unhaul Prophet Song and The Bee Sting, I wanted to tell you that I read these books this month. They were the worst books that I've read. One of the worst books I've ever read, actually. And yeah, I read them. I want to get rid of them. I'm not going to wait to do my March monthly ranking video. Getting rid of them now. If you want more details on what the books are about, why I feel so passionately about them, I will link that video for you so you can check it out. Very entertaining if I do say so myself. Now let's talk about the books that I disliked reading in the month of March. The book that I disliked the most, which means I liked it the least, except for those 2 that I hated, was Child Thief, a horror retelling of Peter Pan by Bram. At first, I was really swept away with Bram's creativity of this dark retelling of a story that I know and love. I love the dark past of Peter Pan and how he was kind of kidnapping children, making them believe that he was there to help them. I loved this different take on Neverland, so it kicked off very strongly at 5 stars for me. I was loving it. But as the book went on, I feel like it really dragged, and there was this mystery element with the lady. She's like the lady of the Neverland space, and she's in trouble, and Peter wants to save her. And I checked out so quickly with that story. I just lost interest. I was really in it for the Peter Pan, the Lost Boys, the pirates. The take on the pirates was actually really cool, and I liked that. I just feel like there were too many things going on in the plot, and I just kind of disconnected from it and started not enjoying it. But what really makes this land in the disliked category was the ending. Because after I finished the book, I was left feeling like, what was the point? What was the point of all that? I felt so unsatisfied. And that is very specific to me. I like to feel satisfied after my reads. If it's really dark and violent and gruesome and there's a lot of things going on, which is true for this book, then at the end I want to feel like it was worth it. And I did not get that resolution from this book. So I think it's a good book. I think it has the right audience out there for it. It's just not me based on how much it dragged out and the unsatisfying ending. A book that I liked a little bit more than that, but is still in the dislike category, is The Widow Cliquot, The Story of a Champagne Empire and the Woman Who Ruled It, a biography by Talar J. Mazzeo. Interesting fact, but this book is available on Kindle Unlimited for those who subscribe and want to check it out. Even though I dislike the book, I would recommend this for a specific audience. I would recommend it for those interested in women's history, French history, the French Revolution, winemaking, and the science behind it. Those are all things that are definitely prevalent in this book. So this is about the Widow Cliquot, and I feel so embarrassed because I've been studying French like very passively, very loosely, but for like 2 years, and I had no idea that veuve meant widow. So interesting. And then Cliquot is her last name, her family's last name, or her husband's family's last name. So this is an interesting story about a woman growing up in France, and at 27, she had no business experience really, in like running a business, even though her father was a very successful businessman. She had no wine experience. They just kind of got into the wine business because they were rich and it was something to do and something they thought they could experiment with. But after certain events in her life and throughout, like, she went through like the French Revolution, change in leadership, change in public attitudes. By 40, she was one of the most successful businesswomen in Europe, and she was one of the first in like international trade, I believe. So huge accomplishments regardless of gender, but even more so because she was a female, and that wasn't necessarily done in those days. I do have an interest in business, so it was fascinating to read about Barb Nicole's different strategies and the different things that she ran into, how she was successful regardless of those things. So there were some interesting moments. However, this read very much like a textbook to me, and so it was a little bit dry or brute, so I can't necessarily say that I enjoyed it. Next, let's talk about the books that I liked in March. The one that I liked the least is Blood Over Bright Haven, a standalone fantasy by M.L. Wong. This is one that I checked out from Kindle Unlimited, and luckily I downloaded it because I don't think it's available any longer on KU. So sorry about that, but I guess here's a reminder to download that book you have your eye on before it's too late. So this one intrigued me because I thought it would be very feminist forward, and dark academia was promised, so I like those elements. This is about a young woman who has been studying her whole life for one of these coveted positions, and these positions open up very infrequently for women, and she's invited to like try out for it, and she gets it right at the start of the book. That's not a spoiler. But there's a lot of bullies in this workplace. So as a joke, they give her an assistant from the lower class. He's a janitor, and he's from this race or this lower class of society, and he's there to help her, but he's actually really smart. So as she gets in this position, she is uncovering these deep, dark secrets of the magic that they practice, and also the society and the government and all the powers that be. She's very disturbed by it. So this one is at the bottom of the liked category because while I appreciate what it set out to do, Homegirl is very racist, and I couldn't get past it. So while she's uncovering these mysteries and she's challenged with what she wants to do, she wants to stand up for what's right, I just can't get past how racist she was towards this lower class of people, how I'm supposed to sympathize with her efforts as being the first woman in this position, and yet she just thinks that this whole class of people is beneath her, and it just really rubbed me the wrong way. She rubbed me the wrong way. So I was not cheering for her. So I found the story very difficult to connect to because of that. And also the magic was so complex. I had a very tough time visualizing it with this equipment that she, along with her peers, use to like cast these spells. It was difficult for me to picture, and I also didn't care. So that's why it's at the bottom of the liked category. A book that I liked more than that and had me compelled to keep turning the page was One of the Good Guys, a thriller by Araminta Hall. This is a multi-POV story. We start off with the POV of this man who is recently divorced or going through divorce, and he is struggling to understand why, because he's one of the good guys. He's very attentive, caring, he labels himself as a feminist, he believes in women's rights and equality, and so he just doesn't get why he is going through a breakup. Then you switch to some other POVs, including his ex, and as we go through the book, we learn that this has a lot of commentary of violence against women, and it has interesting perspective that I think is very thought-provoking and would be great for discussions. If you have a book club, this could be a really good option, but be prepared because it does really beat you over the head with the themes. Like, you cannot escape it. It is very much tell versus show, but it shows you too. Like, it tells you, it shows you, it's just coming at you from every angle. And so that was a little bit overkill. There was also a writing style where we go through different tweets and interview scripts, and I think that's also why I felt like it was beating me over the head with it. But again, since it's so clear and in your face, great for discussions because there's not a lot to misinterpret. The plot ended up taking a bit of a turn though that I feel diluted the theme and maybe did a little bit of harm to the message. Not quite sure, but after being beaten over the head with it for so long, I was kind of shocked it went that direction. But very interesting to still examine, like, you never know what's going on behind closed doors, and really interesting how we as a society say, like, he's one of the good guys because he does these like basic human actions, right? But what's really going on behind the scenes is a little bit disturbing. The next book that I liked in March was 3-Act Tragedy, a Hercule Poirot mystery by Agatha Christie. In March, I continued on my mission to read all the Hercule Poirot mysteries. This one has a dinner party gone wrong. One of my favorite settings because usually it's like a closed circle, like someone at the dinner party is the culprit. So I liked that setting. What bugged me about this one is that Hercule Poirot isn't really prominent until the second half of the book. We have these like amateur sleuths that were at the dinner party trying to solve it. So that kind of bugged me. And the whodunit was meh, it was fine. The motive was something that was really interesting, and the closing lines of this book like gave it a whole other star in my ranking because I love the closing lines of this book. Hercule Poirot remains my favorite fictional character, I think. He is just so conceited and arrogant and yet lovable and brilliant. I love reading about him. Next in the rankings is Strange the Dreamer, a YA fantasy duet by Laini Taylor. I had every intention of reading Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares so that I can say that I read the series, right? It's a duology, but in that way I could say that I read the series. But unfortunately, I DNF'd this at chapter 4. But hear me out. So I did like this. I enjoyed it. I had planned on doing a dedicated reading vlog for it so I could talk about it, but I had no reaction, nothing to talk about. I was reading it and I was trying to take notes and I'm like, I don't have anything interesting to say. Although I can think of one reaction though. I really like the cinnamon roll of a male main character in this one that has his life's dreams come true. He realizes his biggest dream, which is great, and I love the magic. I love that we have like children of gods, of fallen gods. That's really cool, and the whole dreaming nightmares aspect is really cool as well. So I like the magic, I like the character, I liked it. I can't say anything was wrong with it, but I can't say anything else about it, right? So the ending was a cliffhanger, so I was really excited to pick this one up, but this gave me vibes of like a bratty kid or a bratty teenager, and I was reading this at the time when my boyfriend's niece and nephew were visiting us for spring break, and that just wasn't a vibe that I wanted, right? Not that they were brats, but I'm just saying, like, there was a lot of energy, a lot of kid stuff going on, and this just made me not like kids. So I put that down temporarily. I will eventually read it. Getting into books that I really liked, the next one in the ranking is A Grave Robbery, Book 9 in the Veronica Speedwell Mystery Series by Deanna Rayburn. A Grave Robbery is a brand new April release. I was so happy to get the audiobook from Libby in the same month that it was released. That's really cool because I adore this series. Each book in the series is an isolated story. They have their own mysteries that our main characters, Veronica and Stoker, are looking to solve. And of course, they are romantically involved. And that's why we read these stories because they are amazing. I would recommend that you read them in order though, because even though they're contained mysteries, there is an overarching plot that does carry throughout the books. But I would say, as I was reading this one, I realized it's okay to spread the books out because they do a great job of recapping who all the characters are. There is a supporting character named JJ that is one of my favorites. And so each time I'm reading a book, we recap who JJ is, what she knows, what she's done, some of her characteristics. So it's really cool to like refresh you in between books. So read them in order, but you can space them out. This one was great because it had a little bit of a darker vibe. Our characters have a wax figurine, like think of Madame Tussauds wax museum, something like that. But when they look to cut it open, you have to read to see why they're cutting it open, they find a real dead body inside the wax figure, which makes it so creepy because I think wax figures are inherently creepy. So this adds another aspect to it. As with all the other books, we have a twisty, turning mystery with lots of characters that you have as suspects, and the declarations of love are just superb between Veronica and Stoker. Just so accepting of each other, so understanding. Like, to have someone that understands you completely and your needs is amazing. And also, I will say this every single time I read one of these books, I love that the romance does not focus on a marriage and children as a happily ever after. Their happily ever after is adventure. So I am here for it. I will read this series until it's concluded. One weird thing about this one that I hope doesn't continue in other books is Veronica has these random moments of jealousy that were just insane. So I wish she could be a little bit more confident in Stoker, just like Stoker is so confident and supportive of her. Like, she at times was jealous of the wax figurine. The next book that I liked in March was The Last Tale of the Flower Bride, a standalone gothic fantasy by Roshani Chokshi. The Last Tale of the Flower Bride would be perfect for readers who enjoy gothic fantasy. It is gloomy, it is suspenseful, it's passionate, it is infused with supernatural elements, it is atmospheric, all the things that come with a good gothic novel. We have two character POVs in this book. The first one is a bridegroom, and we talk about his romance with his wife, how they met. She's it seems eccentric. I think she's eccentric. And they're madly in love, but she has made him promise never to pry into her past, and he agrees. However, when they go back to her childhood home because her aunt is dying, I think it's her aunt, family member is dying, there's some mysteries, and the house is urging him to solve these mysteries. So then we flip to another POV, which is his wife's childhood friend, and so we flash back to the past to learn about her as a kid, and the two girls, their obsession with like the fae and the fairy world and how they wanted to be a part of this world. So very fascinating, very almost magical realism because the magic isn't that prevalent. Besides, the house is kind of a character because it is urging him to ask these questions and solve the mystery. So atmospheric, great tone to it. I really liked The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. The next book ranked on my list of books that I liked in March is Rouge, a Literary Whore by Mona Awad. I like this book because it definitely delivered on the reasons I wanted to pick it up. It had social commentary on the beauty industry and the anti-aging movement specifically for women. It had complex mother-daughter relationships. It had grief over losing a parent, all with this whore background that was very weird, at times almost felt like a fever dream. In the description for Rouge, GoodReads compares it to Snow White and says it's like a gothic fairy tale, and I would not agree with those statements. While I really liked the book, it didn't read like a fairy tale to me, a dark fairy tale. It really didn't, but it was a fantastic book. I like the commentary within the book, and I definitely recommend Rouge, especially if you have read from Mona Awad before. You know how she, like in Bunny, it gets weird. And that's the best way I can describe it. Weird horror with commentary, that's Rouge. Now it's time for the book that I liked the most in March, and that was Anne of Green Gables, a middle grade classic by L.M. Montgomery. I read this in March because I wanted to see if it could make it for my list of spring book recommendations, and spoiler alert for the video linked down below, but it did make the list. It had fantastic spring vibes. This one is about a married couple who are looking to adopt an 11-year-old boy. But who gets off the train at the station but an 11-year-old girl named Anne? She goes to live with them in Green Gables, which is in Prince Edward Island, Canada, I believe. You can tell geography's not my strong suit. But she goes to live with them, and it is so charming. This almost reads like a series of short stories because we just follow Anne as she stumbles through various adventures. She has the best of intentions. She is so kind. She talks a lot. She cares about people and wants to get to know them. She is so dramatic, so theatric, but she is just so charming. She warms your heart. She really does. And she makes everyone fall in love with her that she meets. It's just a kind, fun story with fantastic spring vibes. I can't believe I've never read this before, even as a kid. I feel like maybe I've seen like a movie or something and saw like a little bit of it, but I was not familiar with all the adventures she gets into, like accidentally getting her best friend drunk on wine. And her friend's mother is like hyper strict, hyper religious. So it's like this huge catastrophic thing that happens. It's so funny. It was cute. And if you like the adorkable kind of Disney characters that kind of like fumble around, I think you'll really like Anne. Now for my favorite part, the books that I loved in the past month. The book that I loved the least was Death Valley, a literary fiction by Melissa Broder. Primarily, I would say this book is about anticipatory grief. We have a main character, and she has grief coming at her from a couple different angles. She has a husband who has a very mysterious illness that has limited his mobility. He's in like a wheelchair a lot of times. He gets really tired. He just can't do the things that he used to. So she has this almost anticipatory grief of losing him. And also her father is very, very ill. He's in the hospital, and he's had a couple incidences where he's been like, he coded and they resuscitated him and brought him back. So it's been a lot of up and down, and she's caring for her ailing father with her sister and her mother, but she's just expecting him to go at any moment. This book is really about all those emotions and the things she's going through, the various guilt that she feels, the interactions with her different family members and society, right? Especially when it comes to her husband. But it has a subplot of a desert survival story, right? Kind of different. And I did not lead with that, even though it was my favorite element of the book. And it is a good chunk of the book, but I want you to have the right expectations for this because it is weird. It is very weird, especially when she gets lost in the desert. She is like hallucinating a lot, but there's these weird chapters throughout that just like pop up where it's just strange. And it's not just when she's like dehydrated, it's throughout the book. There's just these strange, different magical realism almost. You don't understand what's going on. For example, at one point she is on a trip because she's an author and she's staying at a Best Western, which is really fun. The constant conversation about Best Westerns, and now I really want to book a trip and stay in one. And she is in the California desert and she goes for a hike and she comes across this cactus, which I'm pretty sure they're describing a saguaro cactus. The really tall ones with like the arms. We have them all over here in Arizona. In California, they're not really there. That's not the region. So she's really surprised by it, and she goes over and she like sticks her finger in it, and then she crawls inside the cactus, and she can like camp out there and spread out inside this cool, damp, shaded cactus, and she sees things in the cactus. So see what I mean? Like a little bit weird. And it's fascinating to me because I'm a very literal reader. I don't necessarily like this kind of stuff. And there's not always a point, right? It's not always like a solid, satisfying ending, which I've already said in this video I really need. So it's strange to me that I'm starting to like this really strange stuff. but this worked for me. And it could have been the mood, it could have been the writing, but I really love Death Valley. And you know, largely I think it has to do with the desert survival story when she gets lost in the desert and she hurts herself and she's trying to survive. That was really, really fun. So it could have been that bumped it up. Everything just worked for me in this book. The next book that I loved in March was Half a Soul, a cozy historical fantasy by Olivia Atwater. Half a Soul is about a young woman who loses half of her soul. And as a result, she doesn't experience emotions the same as other people. And so she's always looking for social cues around her and has to kind of be coached on how to feel, how to have the right reaction. And she has a hard time connecting with people. I really enjoyed the story with this one, the whimsical fantasy. I love the historical setting of it. And I loved the main character. And I have heard that this has great disability rep, but I don't know. I feel a little bit uncomfortable because the main character is very clearly on the autism spectrum. The way that she takes the social cues to be sure that she's behaving properly or reacting properly. So I read that the character had autism, and to say that she was that way because she only had half a soul, I'm on the border of being offended, but I don't think that was the point. I think it could have been described better, but ultimately, okay, I'm not going to read that deeply into it. I did enjoy this, and overall, it went really well. I'm happy with the direction the story went. I loved our main character. I'm so excited to continue in the series. This would be great for readers who like cozy fantasy because it definitely hit the nail on the head for those vibes. We are officially at my top 3 favorite reads of the month. So the next book that I loved was Sword Heart, a fantasy romance by T. King Fisher. Sword Heart is about a young woman who comes into a sudden inheritance. Unfortunately, the deceased's family members are not happy that she is the sole beneficiary, so they are trying to find ways to take the money from her. While they're figuring it out, they lock her in a room, and she doesn't know how to get out. So she finally comes to the conclusion that she needs to unalive herself. She takes a sword from a wall and tries to impale herself to end things. However, when she unsheathes the sword, a being comes out of it, like a genie, but not. And his sole job is to protect the wielder of the sword. So now he's on her side and he wants to help her. Largely, this was a quest story. They're trying to get help, trying to figure out how to get her inheritance and get herself out of trouble. And the romance comes into play because the woman and the genie in a bottle, the genie and the sword, have a connection. So very, very romance forward. I loved it. Charming romance. This also has an older, more mature female main character because she is a widow. She lost her husband. And so I love that. I love an older character. I wish T. King Fisher didn't beat me over the head because this is like a historical setting and where a woman's worth is only gauged by marriage and children, and she doesn't have children and she's already been married. But I did like that. And this had great comedy, great banter. I love the characters, I love the plot, I love the setting. The only thing I didn't love so much in the writing style, in the dialogue, there was a lot of and like space fillers, which was kind of strange. But something else of note for this book is we have a non-binary character, which was great representation, well done, I felt, and I really loved the character and how they contributed to the story. So again, great representation. My top 2 books of March have actually switched places a couple times, but I think I landed on this next book being in the number 2 slot. The Secret Garden, a middle grade classic by Frances Hogstaub Burnett. This is another case where I read this book to see if it would make it to my spring book recommendations video, link down below, and it did. Fantastic spring vibes, really hit all the senses for it. And what I loved about this was just the story. So we have a young girl, I think she starts off as 9 years old, and she is suddenly orphaned. She finds herself in India without parents, and so she is shipped off to England, I believe, to live with an uncle on his estate. She is used to getting her own way. She is a brat. She refuses to even dress herself because there's servants for that. And she comes to this estate. It's very gloomy, very dreary, and she's bored and restless in this mansion that has over 100 rooms. And she finds adventure in the form of the gardens on the property, including, surprise, surprise, a secret garden that is locked. And it's been kept away because that's the source of her uncle's grief, where he lost his wife. She secretly goes there, she makes a friend, they bring the garden back to life, and other characters come into play. There's exploring of the mansion, which was really cool. And it was so funny because, and I think I mentioned this in my spring video, I'm ruined by adulthood and other books, dark books, because I'm reading this and I'm like, there's no way that this adult could be this kind to our character. Like, something's gonna happen, there's gonna be SA, and I'm preparing myself for that. Or, oh, she just confided her secret into someone, they're going to betray her. Or, you know, the uncle has this big house, like, I wonder if he committed fraud, I wonder if the government's gonna come and seize the property and all the assets. Oh, ring light. Okay, we're just gonna move on. I was just expecting all these bad things to happen, and they didn't. It was just genuinely a heartwarming, feel-good story, and it was so refreshing. It was a nice break, especially springtime when I want like levity and lightness and escape. And I don't normally read middle grade, not for any particular reason. There's just nothing that really piques my interest, but I'm so glad that I read this because it was engaging, even though I'm not 9 years old, like I'm not the target audience. It was still fun, and I love a good mansion setting anyways, and the garden, but it just was wholesome and feel good, and I really, really loved reading this, and I could see myself rereading this every year. My favorite book that I read in March is Best Served Cold, a grimdark fantasy by Jo Abercrombie. Okay, we are really playing fast and loose with what is considered fantasy, because even though all the social sites classify this as fantasy, it's like 3% magic. Okay, this is like medieval fiction, but I freaking love this book. So this is a story about vengeance and betrayal. It is violent, it is gruesome, it is gritty, it was satisfying, it was all these things. So in the very, very beginning, we meet our main character who is a mercenary for this leader. And so she battles and unalives people for a living. And something happens to her right at the beginning that just total betrayal, the worst kind of betrayal. And she's left really scarred from this experience. And so she vows to get vengeance on the 7 men responsible for this act and for uprooting her life. I originally wanted to read this because I heard it was inspired by my favorite all-time book, The Count of Monte Cristo. And that's true. I could see the inspiration. It is not a retelling. Still very, very different. I think the only thing that was similar is that there were 7 people that she was going after, much like The Count of Monte Cristo had his list that he was going after. Similar in that regard, but every other regard is different. This was very violent and gruesome, but it did still have a lot of intelligence to it, which is why I liked it. I liked seeing the plan of going after each one. I love the band of characters that our main character gathered to go after them. They were so charming. So we have like this town drunk who was hilarious. We have this guy named Friendly, and he's obsessed with numbers and counting, which was wild. And then we have let's see, Stereo's Most Treacherous Poisoner. He was a lot of fun to read, and the audiobook narration of his voice was stellar. And then we have this barbarian who just wants to do the right thing. Now, I want to mention, this is a standalone book, but that barbarian who just wants to do the right thing, his name is Shivers. He was a character from the First Law trilogy, not a main character. He showed up a couple times. He might have had a couple lines. I would say that you don't have to read the First Law trilogy to read this. However, we do refer back to that trilogy with the characters and some of the events. So if you don't want to be spoiled for who lives and who dies and who is in power, from that trilogy, don't read this yet. Read that trilogy first. But if you don't care about that level of spoilers, you could totally read this and understand what's going on, and just know that there are constant references to what has happened in the past, or Shivers will be like, oh, I hear this person's voice in my head. You don't really have to know who that person is to like understand what the voice is saying to him, right? Joe Abercrombie is a master of weaving humor throughout his violent, gruesome books, and I respect that and appreciate it so much. And that is why this book is my favorite, because I could be grossed out one moment, I could be shocked that our characters made a certain decision that was very low morals, and yet I'm laughing. And I'm cheering for these characters as they're like torturing people. Why? Joe Abercrombie just does something to me. He is a master, but it is so funny. It is so funny, and the characters are so vivid. Each one is so unique and has their own quirks and their own things, and it was just, there's constant betrayals and constant plot twists and these constant brilliant maneuvers. I love the experience of reading this. I took my time with it. I really savored it. I flipped back and forth between the audio and the physical read. The whole experience was just brilliant and absolutely favorite of the month. That was a stellar reading month. Yes, I read a lot of books. There was a lot of volume there, but also it's the variety. It's the variety of genres to me. The variety of tones and emotions evoked in me as a reader is what made March such a successful reading month. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this video. I hope all of your reads are 5-star reads. I will see you in the next video.